The air in the gilded cage always smelled of aged leather, espresso, and money. It was a scent Elara knew intimately, having breathed it in 6 days a week for the last 5 years. Tonight, the scent was cut by a sharp metallic tang of desperation, her own. Elara moved between the velvet booths, her gaze fixed only on the polished chrome trays she carried. She was the ghost of this exclusive high-stakes establishment, seen but never truly noticed, silent, efficient. Her uniform, crisp and black, hid the fierce, restless intelligence that lay coiled just beneath her skin. At booth 7, the centerpiece of the room, sat Arthur Vance, a name synonymous with venture capital and callous disregard. He wasn't dining, he was performing. "Hi, my beautiful family. I have missed you all. Thank you so for sticking around with me. Truly appreciate your love and support. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin." On the table, bathed in the soft glow of a low-hanging chandelier, was the Chronos Cube. It wasn't a standard puzzle, it was a bespoke titanium and sapphire marvel, rumored to be worth more than Elara's annual salary. Vance had purchased it at a private auction, boasting that its mechanism was mathematically flawless, an impassable barrier designed by a reclusive Swiss cryptographer. Vance, a man in his late 40s whose smooth face was betrayed only by the sharp, calculating glint in his eyes, was currently holding court for 2 bored-looking associates. He was demonstrating the cube's insolubility, turning a mechanism that clicked ominously, securing the cube in its latest, bewildering configuration. 6 hours, gentlemen, Vance declared, his voice a gravelly rumble that carried just loud enough. 6 hours, a $20,000 specialist, and not a single move closer. It's designed to humble the arrogant. A tribute to true complexity. Elara approached the table, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was there to clear a half-empty bottle of vintage champagne. Her hands, usually steady from years of balancing impossible loads, felt shaky. As she reached for the bottle, her eyes fell on the Chronos Cube. It wasn't arrogance that made her stop, it was involuntary recognition. The pattern, the ratio of the interlocking segments, the specific alignment of the etched, glowing sapphire lines. Her mind didn't see a challenge, it saw a sequence. A language. Vance looked up, irritated by her lingering presence. "Something catching your eye, waitress?" he drawled, the dismissal in his tone like a slap. Elara didn't meet his gaze. She looked only at the cube. "The third rotation on the beta axis is a red herring, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the murmurs of the room. Silence fell across the booth. Vance stopped smiling. "Excuse me." She straightened, the conflict between her training, stay invisible, and an almost painful, irresistible intellectual compulsion, speak the truth, warring within her. The compulsion won. "The puzzle isn't about complexity, Mr. Vance," she stated, her emerald eyes finally lifting to meet his. They were surprisingly clear, cold, and intense. "It's about misdirection. The solution requires an inverted Fibonacci sequence tied to a localized magnetic polarity shift on the gamma plate. The third rotation locks the final mechanism if attempted before the 7th. It's a flaw, not a feature." Vance laughed, a sharp, humorless bark. "You're pouring wine, not solving differential equations, sweetheart. Get back to your tray." One of his associates smirked and slid the cube towards her. "Show us, then." 30 seconds. A ridiculous premise, but humor the man, Elara. "Isn't that your name? Let's see your localized magnetic polarity shift." Elara knew the moment she touched it, her life would change. She had spent a decade hiding this capability, this gift, after it had cost her everything. But the sight of the cube, the sheer elegance of the underlying math, was a siren's call she couldn't ignore. She set the tray down with a soft, final clink. Her long, graceful fingers enclosed the cool, heavy metal. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. Click. A precise turn of the alpha disk. Whir. The gamma plate shifted back, then forward, a movement so slight it was almost imperceptible. Click, click. The 7th rotation, bypassing the 3rd. She didn't rush. Her movements were economical, almost meditative. Her brain was running the complex calculation, translating it to kinetic energy, but her face remained impassive, the same mask she wore serving drinks. At 28 seconds, The titanium shell sighed open with a soft, expensive metallic chime. The 6 intricate pieces fell apart cleanly, resting harmlessly on the velvet tablecloth, exposing a core of pure, shimmering sapphire. Vance's jaw went slack. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by a dark, fascinated intensity. Elara didn't wait for applause or questions. She didn't look at the astonished faces. She simply gathered the pieces, placing them gently back into the cube's velvet-lined case, shut the lid, and put the case back in front of Vance. She picked up the discarded champagne bottle, her task complete. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice flat, devoid of triumph. She turned and walked away, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet, leaving a silence far heavier than the loud boastings of moments before. As she disappeared into the kitchen, she felt not pride, but a cold, heavy sense of doom. She had just exposed the secret she had worked so hard to bury. In the booth, Arthur Vance didn't move for a full minute, staring at the cube's case. He then slowly reached for his phone, a predatory gleam returning to his eyes. Elara just made a choice that could change her life forever, for better or worse. What do you think is the biggest secret a person can hide about themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The kitchen was a stark contrast to the front-of-house opulence of the gilded cage. Here, the air was hot, greasy, and functional. Elara returned her empty tray to the dish pit, the clatter of porcelain a familiar grounding noise. She ignored the sideways glances of Marco, the head bartender, who'd seen the whole scene on the security monitor feed. "You know what you just did, Elara?" Marco muttered, wiping down a glass with excessive force. "I solved a puzzle," she replied, pulling off her apron. It was her night off starting in 3 minutes. "No. You solved a puzzle designed by an eccentric genius, for a man who hates being upstaged, in front of 2 billionaires whose entire life revolves around finding the next disruptive talent. You just went from invisible to target." Elara didn't argue. Marco, a hulking man with a gruff exterior and a fiercely protective streak, was rarely wrong about the machinations of the elite. "I needed to see it," she confessed quietly, rubbing the thumb and forefinger that had executed the sequence. "It was beautiful, Marco. A perfect application of a flawed theorem. I had to correct it." Marco sighed, knowing that stubborn intellectual compulsion was the essence of Elara, the part of her that didn't belong here. "Just be careful. Vance doesn't forget." The silence of her life. Elara's ordinary world was a sparsely furnished, meticulously organized one-bedroom apartment above a faded bookshop 10 miles from the city center. It was a fortress of silence. After her shift, she didn't unwind with television or music. She went straight to her desk, a salvaged wooden table covered in stacks of heavily marked-up textbooks on advanced mathematics, cryptography, and theoretical physics. This was where Elara truly lived, in the elegant, unyielding world of numbers. Her emotional driver was a potent, debilitating cocktail of grief and guilt. 10 years ago, Elara Vesper was not a waitress. She was Dr. Elara Vesper, a rising star in computational physics at MIT, on the verge of publishing research that promised a breakthrough in quantum encryption. Her work was revolutionary, but dangerously simple. It could be replicated with common hardware, democratizing security and collapsing the entire multi-billion-dollar government and private defense complex that relied on exclusive, complex keys. The trauma had been immediate and brutal. Her mentor, Professor Alastair Finch, her only family after her parents' death, had been killed in a staged car accident the day before her paper was submitted. Her lab was ransacked, her files wiped, and a whisper campaign launched that painted her as a fraud who plagiarized Finch's work. Terrified, 20-year-old Elara had taken the only path to survival she saw: disappearance. She shredded every remaining note, changed her name, and took a job where no one would ever look for a prodigy, serving coffee to the powerful men who might have been responsible for Finch's death. She had survived by becoming small, quiet, and ordinary. Her solving of the Kronos cube tonight was the first crack in her decade-long camouflage. The anchor and the shadow. There were 2 key secondary figures in Elara's life now. The first was Dr. Rhys Kalin, a professor of philosophy and logic at the local university and her only true friend. He was 10 years her senior, perpetually rumpled in tweed, and possessed an easy, comforting laugh. Elara cleaned his small, book-choked office once a week, a favor exchanged for access to his rare and obscure math journals. Rhys knew Elara was brilliant. He'd seen her effortlessly correct his students' doctoral proofs, but he respected the impenetrable wall she kept around her past. The second, more significant figure, was Elias Thorne. Elias was the owner of the Gilded Cage. He was an enigma, a man in his early 30s, devastatingly handsome with eyes the color of storm-gray slate, who wore bespoke suits and maintained an air of elegant, profound distance. He was the perfect, silent conductor of his elite orchestra. Elara rarely spoke to him, but she felt his gaze often. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared sense that they were both observing a world they didn't truly belong to. Elias had been the one to hire Elara, despite her lack of references and the decade-long gap in her CV. She'd always assumed it was because she was honest, efficient, and never gossiped. Tonight, however, as she walked through the back alley to her bike, she heard his voice. Elara. He was leaning against the cool brick, smoking, the cigarette tip glowing like a red warning light in the darkness. She stopped, her breath catching. He never stayed late. Mr. Thorne. He pushed off the wall, extinguishing the cigarette under his heel. Arthur Vance offered me $50,000 for your full name, former address, and a copy of your CV. 10 minutes after you walked out. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. Her carefully constructed decade of security had just vaporized. And you gave it to him? Elias stepped closer. The shadows made his expression unreadable, but his scent, subtle sandalwood and rain, was suddenly overwhelming. I told him, Elias said, his voice a low melodic rumble, that Elara is the only name I know, that she applied with no CV, and that I would personally break his fingers if he spoke to my staff that way again. Elara stared at him, stunned. This was more than professionalism, it was a risk. Why? Because, Elias murmured, tilting his head slightly, I always knew you were smarter than this room, Elara. But I thought you had a reason for hiding that light. Now you've flickered. And Vance isn't the kind of man to ignore a new variable. You need to tell me what's going on, or I can't protect you when he comes calling. His question hung heavy in the humid night air, a fragile offering of trust and an undeniable threat to her secrecy. Elara felt the first stirrings of an emotion she hadn't permitted herself in years, longing for connection, for safety, for a second chance at the life she'd lost. She had to tell him. But she couldn't. The memory of Professor Finch's shattered glasses was a cold handcuff around her tongue. She shook her head once, sharply. Thank you for the warning, Mr. Thorne. But I have no secrets to tell. She mounted her old bicycle and pedaled away quickly, leaving Elias Thorne standing alone in the darkness, his expression now one of deep, complicated regret. He didn't move until the sound of her tires faded, then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, laminated newspaper clipping, an obituary for Professor Alistair Finch. 2 days passed in a haze of paranoid hypervigilance. Elara didn't hear from Vance directly, but every shadow felt deeper, every phone call too loud. She researched the Chronos cube obsessively, confirming her fear, it was a marker. The underlying mathematics pointed directly back to her unpublished work, an encryption technique she had developed with Professor Finch. Someone hadn't just copied her theorem, they had weaponized it into a toy. On Wednesday, she arrived at Professor Rhys Kalen's office for her cleaning shift. The moment she stepped into his book-lined sanctuary, she knew. Something was wrong. The air was too still. A single book, a rare first edition of Gauss's Disquisitions Arithmeticae that Rhys treated like scripture, was lying face down on the floor, its spine protesting the abuse. Rhys was nowhere in sight. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, the quiet fear of the past 2 days exploding into a cold dread. She called his name, but only the echoing silence answered. Then she saw it. Tucked into the front cover of the abused Gauss text was a business card, sleek, black, and engraved with Arthur Vance's minimalist logo. Scrawled across the back, in thick black ink, was a single cryptic message. The whole equation, Dr. Vesper. Solve it, or watch your variables dissolve. Elara froze. Dr. Vesper. The name she hadn't heard in a decade. The threat was terrifyingly clear. Vance knew everything. And he was using Rhys, her only true intellectual connection, as collateral. This was the trigger. Vance wasn't interested in a job. He was interested in control. He had disrupted her status quo with calculated precision. The invitation. Before she could process the shock, her cheap disposable burner phone, a relic from her days on the run, vibrated. The number was blocked. Elara answered, her voice taut with forced calm. Hello. I apologize for the mess, Elara, Vance's voice purred on the line, laced with synthetic sympathy. Your friend, the charming professor, is currently enjoying a private reading room at a secure location. He's safe, but distracted. We can discuss his release and your past at the same time. Elara gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. What do you want? Simple. I need you to complete the work you started 10 years ago. Your quantum encryption technique is powerful. With your permission, I can make it globally effective. Think of the legacy, Elara. The redemption. You killed my mentor for that work, she spat, the accusation tearing from her throat. There was a moment of silence, and then a soft, chilling chuckle. I'm sure you believe that, but the past is a messy, unreliable ledger. I want the algorithm, fully refined, by dawn tomorrow. Meet me tonight at midnight at the old Harrington Pier, warehouse B12. Bring the formula. I'll bring the good professor. He didn't wait for her reply. The line went dead, leaving Elara alone in the ransacked office, surrounded by the ghosts of her academic life and the physical evidence of her mentor's legacy. She sank into Reese's leather chair, her mind racing. She had nothing. No notes, no hardware, no backup. Vance wasn't asking for the published work. He was asking for the refinement, the whole equation, the theoretical breakthrough that only existed in her memory. He wanted the last piece of Professor Finch's work. The reluctant ally. Elara's instinct was to run, to disappear deeper. But Reese was hostage. Her decade-long pattern of self-preservation had to break. She had to act, and she couldn't do it alone. She raced back to the gilded cage, knowing Elias Thorne would still be there, closing the books. She burst through the swinging kitchen door, ignoring Marco's warning yell. Elias was seated in his minimalist office, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his sharp features. He looked up, his expression instantly shifting from business detachment to intense concern. Elara? What happened? She didn't waste time on pleasantries or explanations. She slapped Vance's business card down on his desk, the message face up. He took Reese, she gasped, fighting for control. Arthur Vance has my friend. He knows who I am. He wants the formula, the work I did with Finch, by tomorrow morning. If I go, I walk into a trap. If I don't, Reese dies. Elias picked up the card, reading the chilling threat. His eyes narrowed, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. Finch, he murmured, almost to himself. I knew it. He looked directly into her eyes, no longer the detached owner, but a man making a serious commitment. I already knew Vance was hunting you, Elara. But I need to know the truth. Who is Dr. Vesper? What is this formula he wants that's worth kidnapping and murder? Tears of fear and frustration finally welled in Elara's eyes. She took a deep, shuddering breath and let the truth tumble out, years of suppressed history crashing into the quiet room. The formula. It's a quantum-level cryptographic key. It's the only thing that can break the Leviathan Protocol, the most secure defense network in the world, the one the government and every corporation, including Vance's, relies on to protect their biggest secrets. Finch and I created it to decentralize power. Vance wants it to seize ultimate control. Elias slowly pushed his chair back. He stood towering over her, his gray eyes suddenly flashing with a depth of understanding, or something darker, that terrified her. The Leviathan Protocol. He repeated, his voice barely audible. He walked to a shelf and pulled down a small, inconspicuous black box. I need you to trust me, Elara, he said, turning back. You cannot go to that pier alone. Vance is a predator. If he takes the formula, the world changes. And not for the better. He held out his hand. His touch was warm, grounding. Elara had to make an immediate, impossible choice. Trust the only man who knew her secret and offered protection, or revert to her solitary, failed strategy of escape. Reese's face swam before her eyes. Midnight. Harrington Pier, she confirmed, placing her hand in his. The alliance was struck, reluctant on her part, fiercely determined on his. The simple choice to trust one person over another had just thrust Elara back onto the high-stakes stage she had fled a decade ago. The interior of Elias's black, unmarked SUV was a cocoon of expensive silence. They drove toward the old dockyards, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and neon. Elara, clutching her hands in her lap, felt a cold knot of fear giving way to a strange, exhilarating adrenaline. The formula, Elias said, His eyes focused on the dark road ahead. You said it only exists in your memory. How secure is that? Perfectly, Elara replied. It's not just a sequence of numbers, it's a methodology. To write it down, I have to mentally reconstruct the entire logical framework we built over 2 years. It's complex enough that stress or distraction could make me miss a step. Vance knows that, Elias noted grimly. That's why he took Reese. He's applying pressure to force a mistake. He pulled into a hidden alcove overlooking the derelict Harrington Pier. Warehouse B12 was a massive, skeletal structure, dark and silent. We wait until the last minute, Elias said, checking a subtle wristwatch that was clearly more than a timepiece. I'll go in alone first. I need to scan the perimeter for traps and personnel. You stay in the vehicle. Elara shook her head instantly. No. Vance wants me. If he sees a distraction, or if I don't appear exactly when he expects, he'll assume I'm calling for help. Reese pays the price. I'm walking in at midnight on the dot. You follow and neutralize the threat after I secure Reese's release. Elias turned off the ignition and faced her, the only light coming from the dashboard. He was impossibly close. The tension that had simmered between them for 5 years, the unacknowledged attraction hidden beneath their professional veneer, suddenly spiked, hot and urgent. You're commanding me, Elara? He asked, his voice low, a challenge edged with reluctant admiration. I'm making the only logical move to save an innocent life, she countered, meeting his gaze. You're an unknown variable, Mr. Thorne. I know what I can risk, but I don't know what you're willing to sacrifice. His gaze searched hers, a complicated mixture of sorrow and a fierce protectiveness. I'm willing to sacrifice everything, Elara. More than you know. The cryptographer's clue. While they waited, Elias reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a worn, leather-bound notebook. Not a journal, but a complex hand-drawn atlas of geometric patterns and mathematical symbols. My father's, Elias said, seeing her questioning look. He was also a cryptographer. Worked with the government decades ago, before he retired and bought the Gilded Cage as a sort of hiding place. Elara took the notebook, her fingers tracing the patterns. They were beautiful, ancient, foundational work in a forgotten branch of non-Euclidean geometry. It was the intellectual framework that underpinned the Chronos Cube. The Chronos Cube was a prototype, Elara whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. It wasn't just designed to be hard, it was designed to be a calling card. It was based on this framework, the one Vance wants. And the man who sold it to Vance, Elias continued, leaning in, his breath warm against her ear, was named Dr. Julian Hayes. Hayes was Professor Finch's rival. A man who desperately tried to prove Finch's quantum theory was unstable and flawed. Hayes disappeared right after Finch's death. Elara felt the pieces clicking into place. Hayes didn't disappear. He was forced out by Vance. He's the one who gave Vance the foundation of the formula, but he couldn't complete the refinement. Vance needs me to finish Hayes's mistake. The atmosphere in the car was electric. They were two minds, perfectly synchronized, uncovering a conspiracy 10 years cold. For the first time since Finch died, Elara felt seen, not just the waitress, but the brilliant scientist. The double-sided coin. Why are you helping me, Elias? Elara asked, turning the question over like a difficult proof. You run a secretive club for the elite. You profit from the shadows. Why risk it all for a former employee and her missing friend? Elias didn't flinch. He looked out at the dark warehouse, his profile sharp and haunted. 10 years ago, I didn't help someone I should have, he admitted, his voice barely a breath. A crucial moment. A choice between duty and self-preservation. I chose self-preservation. That choice cost me dearly. I won't make that mistake again. He finally turned back to her, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes shattered her carefully constructed walls. And Elara, he added, reaching out and brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, you are the most beautiful equation I've ever had the honor of trying to solve. The romantic tension was a palpable, dangerous force. It was a distraction, an emotional weakness, but it was also a source of desperate, intoxicating strength. Elara knew, standing on the precipice of confrontation with a killer, that she was falling for the one man who seemed to understand her brilliance and her fear in equal measure, a man who was himself shrouded in secrets. Tick-tock. The clock on the dash flashed 11:50 p.m. 10 minutes left. Elias pulled a small high-tech earpiece from the box he'd brought earlier. If I say the word Chronos during the exchange, it means the deal is a decoy, and you need to abort the mission immediately and go to Reese's office. There's a safe there. Use the number sequence I just showed you from my father's notes to open it. He didn't explain why, or what was in the safe. He only gave her the instructions and the kiss, brief, sudden, and electrifying, that stole her breath and confirmed everything she had been denying. "Stay alive, Elara Vesper," he commanded, his gray eyes burning into hers. Elias Thorne opened the car door and melted into the darkness, a shadow moving toward the warehouse, leaving Elara alone, heartbroken, and armed with a secret numerical code and a single frightening command word. The deepening mystery had changed the stakes from a rescue mission to a complex, multi-layered heist where the most valuable asset was Elara's mind, and the most volatile variable was her heart. The kiss just introduced a major complication to their mission. When facing a crisis, which is the greater risk? Trusting your head, logic, or trusting your heart, emotion? Let us know your take in the comments. At precisely midnight, Elara walked out of the shadows and into the cavernous concrete expanse of Warehouse B12. The air was thick with the smell of brine and abandonment. A single, powerful construction light had been positioned in the center, casting hard shadows that seemed to swallow the edges of the room. Arthur Vance was waiting under the light, impeccably dressed, looking less like a kidnapper and more like a CEO attending a hostile takeover. Beside him, tied to a chair and gagged, was Professor Reese Kalin. Reese's eyes were wide with fear, and when he saw Elara, they pleaded silently for her to leave. "Punctual, Dr. Vesper," Vance greeted, his voice echoing. He was alone, which immediately put Elara on edge. Where were the bodyguards? Where was Elias? "Reese first," Elara demanded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I see him safe, untied, and walking toward me, and then I write down the formula." Vance smiled, a predatory, chilling gesture. A perfectly logical demand. But logic is often secondary to power, Elara. He reached behind Reese's chair and pulled out a sleek, modern tablet. "I believe you recognize this hardware. It's what you and Finch worked on, isn't it? The first mobile quantum processor." Elara recognized the prototype instantly. Finch had called it the Cipher Stone. "The formula needs to be keyed directly into this," Vance continued. "It's the only vessel secure enough. And to ensure your cooperation, I'm simply going to have my lead programmer, Dr. Julian Hayes, monitor the input." A door in the back wall slid open, and a thin, severe man with glasses stepped into the light. Dr. Julian Hayes. Finch's bitter rival. He carried an ominous sense of resentment and defeat. "Hello, Elara," Hayes muttered, adjusting his glasses nervously. "It's been a long time." Elara's mind worked furiously. Hayes was monitoring the input, but he couldn't solve the equation. Only she could. This was the moment of highest risk. "All right, Vance," she said, nodding toward Reese. "Untie him." Vance gestured. Hayes quickly cut Reese's restraints and removed the gag. Reese stumbled to his feet, disoriented but free. "Go, Reese. Now." Elara urged. Reese didn't hesitate. He took 2 shaky steps toward Elara, then suddenly he stopped. He looked past her, toward the darkest corner of the warehouse entrance. "Wait," Reese whispered, his face turning ashen. "He's here." The devastating betrayal. Before Elara could turn, before she could utter the command word Chronos into her earpiece, a figure emerged from the deep shadows near the entrance. It wasn't a bodyguard. It was Elias Thorne. But he wasn't sneaking in to rescue her. He was walking directly toward Arthur Vance, his posture relaxed, his expression calm, and his eyes focused not on Elara, but on the quantum tablet in Vance's hand. He was wearing the same bespoke suit, but in his hands, he now held a slender briefcase, the same kind used by elite couriers for classified data. Elara felt the blood drain from her face, the sense of falling absolute and terrifying. "You're late, Thorne," Vance said, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across his face. Elias stopped beside Vance, a cold, elegant pillar of betrayal. He barely spared Elara a glance, but when he did, his storm-gray eyes were utterly devoid of the warmth they'd held hours before. "The periphery sweep took longer than expected, Arthur," Elias replied, his voice the same low, melodic rumble, but now coated in a chilling layer of professionalism. "Security protocol is paramount when dealing with this kind of asset." He didn't address her, but his words sliced through Alara with surgical precision. Asset. You understand now, Alara, Vance crowed, savoring the moment. This isn't a rescue. This is a transfer of ownership. The midpoint twist crashed down around her. Elias Thorne wasn't her protector. He was Vance's chief security strategist and the true mastermind behind the operation to acquire her work. The late nights, the gentle understanding, the passionate kiss, all of it was calculated to gain her trust and ensure she showed up. The newspaper clipping he'd carried, the knowledge of the Leviathan Protocol, the shared intellectual understanding, it wasn't connection, it was research. The truth of the lie. Elias opened the briefcase. It wasn't full of documents, but a stack of financial instruments. Arthur, as per the agreement, Elias stated, handing the briefcase to Vance. The final payment for the acquisition of the Vesper algorithm, refined and functional, and the disposal of all non-essential liabilities. Liabilities. He meant Reese and Alara. Reese, standing a few feet away, finally found his voice, shaking with outrage. Thorne, you told me you wanted to help Alara expose Vance's operation. You were feeding me intelligence for months. Elias finally looked at Reese, his expression hardening into cold indifference. I was observing your behavior, Professor. You were an excellent barometer of Alara's paranoia. I had to know when she would break and contact you. He turned back to Alara, his eyes now truly terrible, cold, distant, and utterly regretful, but for reasons Alara couldn't comprehend. I needed you to complete the work, Alara, Elias admitted quietly. Hayes failed. Only your specific understanding of Finch's theoretical gap could make the algorithm operational. Everything from my father's journal to the setup at the Gilded Cage was designed to lead you here, at this precise moment, under maximum pressure, to make the exchange. Alara's mind, reeling from the emotional devastation, suddenly focused on a single detail, the cipher stone tablet in Vance's hand. The kiss, she choked out, her voice raw with heartbreak. Was that a lie too? Elias closed his eyes for a brief, agonizing moment. It was complicated, but irrelevant now. He reached into his jacket. Alara thought he was pulling a weapon, but he simply retrieved a stylus and the cipher stone tablet from Vance. Dr. Vesper, let's complete the final step, Elias instructed, his voice losing its emotional complexity and becoming purely commanding. You can still save Reese, if you just give us the sequence. She looked at him, the man she had trusted with her safety and her heart. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it, her brilliant mind ignited, forging a new path. He said the kiss was complicated. He also told me to go to Reese's office and use the code if he said, Kronos. He hadn't said the word, but the situation was worse than any decoy. She had to make a choice, give him the genuine algorithm and empower the people who murdered her mentor, or give him something else entirely. The sequence. Alara repeated, a sudden chilling calm washing over her. She raised her head, locking eyes with Elias. You don't get the whole equation for a partial lie, Thorne. She didn't raise a finger to the tablet. Instead, she took a single deliberate step toward Reese. The air in the warehouse was now colder, thick with shattered trust. Alara stood firm, refusing to approach the tablet. Her emotional core was breaking, but her logical mind was performing complex triage. Move him, Thorne, Vance commanded, his patience wearing thin. The deal is conditional on the algorithm, not the theatrics. Elias, looking utterly wretched but maintaining his posture of cold professionalism, gave a subtle nod to Hayes. Hayes grabbed Reese, yanking him backward toward a set of heavy steel doors. Stop. Alara cried, the sight of Reese being dragged away finally breaking her composure. Don't touch him. Then give us the encryption, Alara, Elias said, his voice hard. Now, or you lose him. Alara looked from Reese's terrified, pleading eyes to Elias's unreadable gray gaze. She knew the original complete algorithm could never be trusted to their hands. It would cause chaos and validate Finch's murder. But she couldn't let Reese die. She made the most painful intellectual compromise of her life. Fine, she spat, venom lacing the word. She took the stylus from Elias's hand, their fingers brushing one last, agonizing time, and approached the glowing cipher stone tablet. She began to key in the sequence. Her fingers moved with their familiar graceful speed, but her heart was heavy with dread. She wasn't inputting the Vesper algorithm, the perfect, uncrackable key. Instead, she was building a modified version, a deeply flawed, unstable iteration she had hypothesized years ago. It would function initially, appearing to break the Leviathan protocol, but it would degrade within 48 hours, corrupting the entire network and rendering itself useless. A temporary key, a digital lie. Hayes watched the input nervously, comparing the complex variables to his incomplete notes. The coefficients, they're slightly different than the expected parameters, Mr. Vance, he stammered. Vance ignored him, focused only on Ilara's face, searching for a tell. Is this the whole equation, Ilara? Or are you playing games? Ilara finished the final keystroke, locking the input. A green confirmation light flashed on the tablet. It is the equation, she stated, meeting Vance's eyes. Functional and certified. Now let Reese go. The ultimate betrayal. Vance took the tablet from her, his greed overriding his caution. The sheer intellectual value radiating from the finished formula was intoxicating. Excellent, Vance said, beaming, the smile of a man who believed he held the reins of global power. He tossed a small electronic keycard onto the concrete floor at Ilara's feet. Professor Kalen's release code. His ride is waiting outside. You are free to go. Reese looked utterly confused, staring from Vance to Ilara. Ilara, what did you do? Go, Reese. Ilara screamed, pointing at the exit. Don't look back. Reese, bewildered but recognizing the urgency, scrambled to grab the keycard and fled toward the steel doors. Ilara turned to leave, her body shaking with revulsion and exhaustion, when Elias stepped directly into her path. Just go, Ilara, he murmured, his eyes full of pain. But before she could pass him, Vance laughed, a sound that scraped against the cavernous silence. Not quite, Thorn. Protocol. Elias flinched, his composure finally cracking. Arthur, the deal was for the formula and the release of the non-essentials. She fulfilled her end. Vance didn't look at Elias. He looked at Ilara. A digital contract isn't enough, Dr. Vesper. My organization requires the absolute elimination of the source code, your mind. He nodded toward Hayes. Julian Hayes, looking terrified, pulled a small, silver syringe from his pocket. The drug suppresses short-term memory encoding, Vesper, Hayes whispered, eyes darting everywhere. You won't remember the formula. You won't remember anything from the last few weeks. Ilara's world tilted. Not death, but the obliteration of her intellect, the erasure of her last 10 years of life, her memories of Finch, her knowledge of the equation, even the memory of Elias. This was the true price of her compromise. This was the dark night. She stumbled backward, tears finally streaming down her face, not from fear of the needle, but from the searing pain of Elias's betrayal. You knew, she accused Elias, her voice thin and shattered. You knew they wouldn't let me walk away with the knowledge. This was always the plan. Elias looked like a statue carved from granite, paralyzed in silent agony. His father's words, the mistake he wouldn't make again, had been a lie. He was doing it again, watching another life destroyed for profit. I tried to find another way, Elias finally managed, his voice thick with self-hatred. I thought if I gained Vance's trust, I could stop the memory wipe, give you a chance to run later. I failed. Rock bottom. Hayes lunged, the silver needle flashing under the harsh light. Ilara dodged, running blindly toward the nearest cover, a stack of rusting oil drums. Vance signaled 2 new men, who emerged from the shadows, his real security detail. They were focused entirely on preventing her escape. Cornered behind the drums, Ilara felt every emotion she had suppressed for a decade rise up and choke her, the grief for Finch, the guilt over the unfinished algorithm, and the fresh, agonizing heartbreak caused by Elias. She had broken her silence, she had trusted the wrong man, and she had just handed a flawed, dangerous weapon to a tyrant, all for nothing. Now, she would lose her mind. She was truly alone. Elias was an enemy who claimed to feel pain, but who stood idly by. Reese was gone. Her genius was about to be erased. As the 2 guards and Hayes closed in, Ilara pressed her back against the cold, rusting metal of the drums, closing her eyes. She wasn't praying. She was frantically searching the recesses of her memory for the one thing she hadn't given away, the last piece of knowledge that was purely her own, the sequence Elias had told her to use if he said Chronos. He hadn't said the word, but he had betrayed her in the worst way possible. He had given her a key, and now she was trapped. She had nothing left but the raw, aching core of her intelligence, and the faint, illogical hope that the man who betrayed her was somehow still trying to save her. Crouched behind the rattling oil drums, the shadows of Vance's security closing in, Ilara had less than 30 seconds before Hayes would reach her with a needle. She closed her eyes, not to surrender, but to silence the noise, the pounding in her chest, the distant sirens, or perhaps just her imagination, and the overwhelming, crippling pain of Elias's betrayal. She remembered Elias's instructions from earlier. If I say the word Kronos, go to Reese's office. There's a safe there. Use the number sequence I just showed you from my father's notes to open it. He hadn't said the word, but he had used Kronos in his conversation with Vance earlier, referencing the Kronos cube, the very device that started all this. And his betrayal was the loudest signal she could have received. Ilara realized the truth. Elias was playing a double game. His betrayal was the real trigger. He couldn't risk exposing his true loyalties to Vance, so he made the deal appear seamless, while slipping her the one critical clue. The kiss wasn't just complicated, it was a desperate, emotional apology for the lie he was about to tell her. His regretful, agonizing paralysis during the memory wipe reveal wasn't an act, it was genuine fear for her. He hadn't stopped them because he couldn't. But he had given her the key. She focused, tuning out the chaos. She had only seen the sequence, a complex 7-digit numerical chain based on her specific quantum key, disguised using his father's old geometric mapping, for less than a minute in the car. The inverted Fibonacci, overlaid onto the geometric axis. $, 7 \3, $1, $2 $10/2 $4 8 to $5 Her mind, despite the emotional trauma, whirred to life. She didn't see numbers, she saw patterns, interconnected logic, an undeniable elegance that could only come from a mind trying to communicate through layers of security. It was a lock and a key disguised as a distraction. Hayes lunged, his hand outstretched, the syringe glinting. Ilara burst from behind the drums, not running for the exit, but running toward the confrontation. She moved with a calculated ferocity, the physical manifestation of her mental breakthrough. The turnaround. She didn't try to fight the two security guards. Instead, she ducked low, grabbing a handful of fine metallic dust from the top of an old barrel. As she shot past Elias, she executed a rapid, precise move. She threw the dust, not at Hayes or the guards, but directly at Vance, who was clutching the cipher stone tablet. Vance gasped, instinctively raising his free arm to shield his eyes from the stinging dust. Hayes, stop her. Thorne, what are you waiting for? Vance bellowed, momentarily blinded. This was the chance. The moment of truth. I'm waiting for the real sequence to execute, Arthur, Elias said, his voice dropping the professional veneer and hardening into something resolute and dangerous. Elias moved with a blinding speed Ilara had never imagined. He intercepted Hayes, grabbing the scientist's arm in a vice grip and twisting the syringe out of his hand. Hayes screamed in pain and terror. Then, Elias turned to the two guards, who were moving toward Ilara. He didn't use a standard security maneuver. He used combat physics, clean, brutal takedowns that left both men incapacitated in less than 3 seconds. Ilara watched, stunned. This wasn't the owner of a high-end club. This was a highly trained operative. The lie is over, Ilara, Elias said, his chest heaving, his gray eyes locked on Vance, who was frantically wiping the dust from his face. I'm not Vance's security strategist. I'm the man who's been hunting him for 10 years. The true alliance. He finally revealed his secret. My father, the one who owned the Gilded Cage? He didn't retire. He was the original cryptographer who invented the Leviathan Protocol. He realized what a monster it was, and he hired Finch to create the counterkey, your algorithm. When Finch was killed, my father realized Vance and his associates were turning Finch's work into a weapon. My father set up the Gilded Cage as a surveillance post, watching the very men he feared. When he died last year, I took over, pretending to be a loyal opportunist, waiting for Vance to expose his hand. Ilara took a deep, steadying breath. The heartbreak was still raw, but the revelation gave her a fierce, empowering clarity. He had been an enemy, yes, but only on the surface. Underneath, he was a fellow soldier in a war she thought she was fighting alone. The safe, Ilara said, her voice clear and strong. You didn't give me the code to escape. What's in the safe? Elias retrieved a small metallic flash drive that had been concealed in the heel of his shoe. The safe contains the original unmodified Vesper algorithm, the real key. I needed you to compromise the tablet to buy us time. The compromised key you just gave him will activate the network, allowing him access, but it will also trigger a 48-hour decay. We have 48 hours to deliver the true algorithm to the right people and shut Vance down permanently. Vance, finally clear-eyed, realized he'd been duped again. He looked from the incapacitated Hayes to Elias, his face a mask of incandescent fury. "You suicidal fool, Thorne. You betrayed me." Elias didn't respond. He looked at Alara, and in his eyes, she saw not longing, but a profound respect and renewed commitment. "We have to go now, Alara," Elias urged. "Reese is safe. We have the real weapon. We start running the clock." Alara, now fully restored and emboldened, nodded. The waitress was gone, Dr. Vesper was back, and she had an ally she could trust. She had traded her safety for a critical 48-hour window, and the inner breakthrough had armed her with the courage and the sequence needed for the final desperate confrontation. Alara and Elias fled the warehouse, leaving the unconscious guards, the whimpering Hayes, and a roaring mad Arthur Vance behind. Elias drove with a controlled, terrifying skill, weaving the SUV through the deserted docklands. 48 hours, Elias repeated, glancing at the flash drive sitting in the cup holder. "That's how long the compromised key you gave Vance will hold the network open before it collapses. We need to reach Axiom Base, the one secure facility Finch and my father established 10 years ago. It's the only place with the hardware capable of injecting the genuine Vesper algorithm and performing the network rollback before Vance can exploit his access." "And where is Axiom Base?" Alara asked, her knuckles white as she gripped the dash. "Underneath Reese Kalen's office," Elias revealed. "The safe wasn't for the real formula, it was the access panel. Reese has been covering for us for months, maintaining the cover story." The revelation of Reese's silent heroism was a brief, comforting warmth in the rush of adrenaline. He wasn't just a hostage, he was an integral part of the resistance. As they sped toward the university, Elias handed Alara a device. "Vance is using the compromised key to try and lock the Axiom system now. He's preempting us. This is a terminal. You have to input a complex temporary firewall, something that will slow the decay and block his attempts to override the base's security protocols." Alara grabbed the terminal. This was her element, a battle fought not with fists, but with pure, unyielding math. "He won't stop until he controls the network. We need to hit him where it hurts the most." Confrontation at Axiom Base. They arrived back at the university campus an hour before dawn. Reese's office was quiet. They found the secure safe Alara had been told about, a heavy steel door disguised beneath a movable bookcase. Alara keyed in the sequence Elias had taught her, the final layer of protection based on the geometry notes. The door hissed open, revealing a hidden elevator. The Axiom Base was subterranean, sterile, and buzzing with specialized quantum computing hardware. It was a digital fortress built for exactly this moment. Reese Kalen was already there, looking disheveled but operating a central console with frantic precision. "Alara! Elias!" Reese exclaimed, relief washing over his face. "Thank God. Vance's digital attack is hitting us hard. His compromised key is trying to initiate the Leviathan override. It will give him full network access and delete all evidence of his involvement." "We're here to stop him," Elias stated, immediately moving to the perimeter defenses. "Alara, get that firewall up. Reese, prep the main injector for the Vesper algorithm." Alara ran to the main terminal, her fingers flying across the custom-built keyboard. The digital war was brutal. Vance's attack was a massive decentralized swarm of corrupted code attempting to brute force the Axiom-based defenses. "His attack is too aggressive," Alara shouted over the humming processors. "The firewall is holding, but it's delaying the decay, not stopping the access. He's using the window of vulnerability I created." "Then we end the game now," Elias declared. He slammed the flash drive into the injector port. "Reese, initiate the final sequence." The ultimate revelation. Reese's hand hovered over the activation button. "Wait. Alara, Elias, look at this." On the largest screen, the source code of Vance's digital attack was displayed. It wasn't just corrupt. It was targeted, deeply complex, and utterly unique. Vance didn't program this, Ilara realized, staring at the screen. This level of intricate self-repairing code. Only one other person alive knows how to write this elegantly. Suddenly, the security alarms blared deafeningly. The main blast door to the base shuddered. Something massive was hitting the exterior. He found us. Reese yelled. Impossible, Elias said, drawing a concealed weapon. This base is unlocatable. Then a voice, amplified by a loudspeaker system built into the base itself, filled the room. It's only impossible if you don't know the foundational geometric mapping of the base itself, Elias. A smaller inner door, a hidden emergency access point Reese didn't even know about, unlocked with a gentle click. Standing in the entrance, not Arthur Vance, but Dr. Julian Hayes. He was no longer the whimpering scientist. He was confident, calm, and holding a small, terrifying device, a universal remote for the Axiom base systems. Welcome to Axiom Base, Julian, Ilara said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You designed the Chronos Cube. You started this. But you were always too afraid of Vance to finish the work. Hayes shook his head, a triumphant yet wounded expression on his face. The final reveal, Hayes declared, stepping fully into the light. Arthur Vance was never the mastermind, Ilara. He was the distraction, the money. I was the one who killed Finch. I was the one who stole your early work. And I was the one who was waiting for Elias to lead me to the ultimate prize, the location of Axiom Base and the Vesper algorithm. Hayes had used the Chronos Cube and his brief time with Vance to get close, to gather the final intel he needed. He was the true antagonist. The ultimate betrayal was the one you never saw coming, Elias, Hayes sneered. I wasn't your father's enemy. I was his first apprentice, the one he rejected for being too power-hungry. I designed this base's internal security protocols. I know every back door, every failsafe. And now, I initiate the final protocol. Hayes pressed a single button on his remote. The main power to the Axiom base flickered, then died. All screens went black. The only light was the emergency red lamp. The final showdown. In the darkness, Hayes had the advantage. He knew the layout perfectly. Elias immediately tackled Ilara and Reese, shoving them behind the massive central terminal. Ilara, think. Elias urged, his voice tight. The power. How does he plan to get the real algorithm without the processors? He doesn't need the processors to destroy the work, Ilara gasped, realization dawning. The red light. The emergency systems run on the core thermal unit. If he overloads that, the heat pulse will fry every piece of digital storage, including the flash drive. Julian. Elias roared into the darkness. It ends here. A single gunshot cracked the silence. Elias cried out, his weapon clattering onto the floor. He'd been hit. Ilara didn't hesitate. Her mind, pushed past the point of fear, became cold, pure logic. She saw a solution, a mathematical certainty. The thermal unit, Ilara whispered to Reese. It has a manual override, a coolant pump. It's behind the console. Reese, get the core temperature down. Now. Reese, despite his fear, scrambled toward the back panel. Ilara grabbed Elias's discarded weapon. She didn't know how to shoot, but she knew how to use misdirection. She fired a single, blind shot high into the ceiling. Hayes flinched, momentarily giving away his position. Ilara launched herself out from behind the console, running directly toward the center of the dark room, where the Vesper algorithm flash drive was still sitting in the unpowered injector port. Hayes fired again, the bullet whistling past her ear. She reached the injector, ripped out the flash drive, and simultaneously, she executed the physical sequence that had been drilled into her mind years ago, the exact sequence of pressure points that would manually initiate the base's full, system-wide lockdown, regardless of the power status. Click. Press. Turn. Lock. The base didn't restart, but a series of heavy metal shutters slammed down across every access point, sealing Hayes inside with them. Hayes screamed in frustration. You foolish girl. I can still overload the thermal unit. The algorithm is useless if it's fried. Just then, Reese succeeded. A violent rush of frigid coolant liquid flooded the chamber floor. The red light flickered, and the core system stabilized. Ilara, weapon still shaky in her hand, faced Hayes, who was now cornered by the console. She held up the tiny flash drive, the culmination of a decade of grief and a lifetime of genius. "It's over, Julian," Elara said, the confidence of the scientist fully returned. "You can't destroy the algorithm. You can't access it. You've been locked in your own design." At that moment, the emergency systems kicked in again, triggered by the stabilizing core unit. The lights came on, illuminating the scene. Hayes defeated, Reese exhausted, Elias bleeding but conscious, and Elara standing triumphant, finally holding the key to her past and her future. The sound of police sirens, orchestrated by Reese before he entered the base, began to echo faintly from above. Justice had been secured, not by revenge, but by intellect, courage, and true partnership. The morning sun filtered through the small high windows of the Axiom base, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the stabilizing processors. Hayes had been taken into custody by a specialized confidential branch of law enforcement that Elias had contacted years ago, a unit committed to upholding the original integrity of the Leviathan Protocol. Vance was already implicated through the bank transfers and the testimony of Julian Hayes. Reese Kalin, bruised but beaming, was overseeing the final data rollback. The true Vesper algorithm had been successfully injected, not to destroy the network, but to stabilize it, repair the flaws Julian Hayes had exploited, and secure it against future external manipulation. Elara's work had finally been used for its intended purpose: protection, not power. Elara sat beside Elias, who was receiving medical attention for the gunshot wound to his arm. The wound wasn't critical, but the emotional exhaustion was profound. "You took a bullet for me," Elara murmured, watching the medic bandage his arm. Elias met her gaze, his gray eyes softened by relief and something deeper. "I told you, Elara. I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. 10 years ago, I didn't save Finch. This time, I saved the only person who mattered." "You risked everything on a guess that I'd understand the Chronos signal," she challenged gently. "No," Elias corrected. "I risked everything on the knowledge that you are incapable of not solving the puzzle. The emotional trauma was necessary for Vance to believe I had him cornered. The sequence I gave you was my safety net, the only way to ensure you had the chance to deliver the truth." The secret was gone. The disguise was shed. They were simply Elara and Elias, two brilliant minds connected by a shared mission and a profound tested trust. A new equation. 3 months later, Elara Vesper was no longer a ghost. She was sitting in a sun-drenched, glass-walled office at a newly established, non-profit security institute, an organization funded by a network of philanthropists, dedicated to open-source cryptography and the ethical use of quantum technology. Reese Kalin was her chief of research. They were finally using her genius to benefit the world. She looked down at her hands that had once held trays, then a puzzle cube, then a gun, and now, a prototype for a universally accessible encryption key. She was redeemed of her guilt, knowing Finch's legacy was secure. The door opened, and Elias walked in. He was wearing a casual jacket over a simple shirt, no longer the tailored armor of the Gilded Cage owner. He had sold the club, using the proceeds to start an anti-surveillance foundation. "Dr. Vesper," he greeted, a mischievous warmth in his voice. "I have a new puzzle for you." He didn't pull out a metal cube, he pulled out a set of keys. "I found a place," he explained, walking over and resting his hands on her desk. "A small cottage by the sea. It has a telescope, a messy garden, and absolutely no complex security systems. It's safe. It's quiet. And it's far away from anyone who cares about market manipulation or digital empires." Elara stood, her heart swelling with a sense of earned peace and connection. "Is this an invitation, Mr. Thorne?" "It's a declaration," Elias corrected, his gaze intense. "My life has been dedicated to shadows and secrets. I want the rest of it to be dedicated to light, truth, and you, Elara. I love you." Elara didn't need to perform any complex calculations to verify the truth of his words. The emotional clarity was immediate and certain. "The equation is complete, Elias," she said, reaching out and taking his hand, the promise of a future finally outweighing the pain of the past. "I love you too." He didn't need any further answer. He helped her into her coat, and together, they walked out of the office and into the future, leaving the complexities of the city behind for the simple elegance of a life built on honesty and shared purpose. As they drove toward the coast, the car radio played a piece of classical music Elara hadn't heard in years, the same melody Professor Finch used to hum when they were on the verge of a breakthrough. She smiled, turning to Elias, resting her head against his shoulder. Her life wasn't defined by running or hiding anymore. It was defined by discovery, strength, and love. The ultimate victory wasn't solving the puzzle, it was finding the perfect partner to share the solution. Ilara's journey moved from loneliness and guilt to success and love. If you had to face the hardest challenge of your life, who is the one person you trust to stand with you? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.